Welcome in, everyone, to another deep dive. This time, we're going to be tackling a really messy and controversial case involving a TikToker named Trevino. You might have seen her name in the headlines recently. She's been making waves for all the wrong reasons, and yeah, we're going to get into all that. But first, I want to introduce our expert who's going to help us unpack all of this and maybe shed some light on just what's going on here.
Thanks for having me. I've been following this case for a while now, and it's definitely one of the most, disturbing and fascinating I've seen in a while. There's just so much to unpack here. The questionable parenting choices, the relationships with inmates, the blatant exploitation. It's a lot.
It really is. What makes it even more complicated is the fact that it's all playing out so publicly on TikTok. So we're not just talking about private family matters here.
Mm.
This is a woman who's actively choosing to share her life and the lives of her children with the entire world, and the implications of that are pretty huge.
You said it. It really forces us to confront some uncomfortable questions about the role of social media in our lives, the ethics of content creation, and the boundaries between entertainment and exploitation. I mean, how much is too much when it comes to sharing your life online, especially when children are involved?
Yeah, that's a great point.
Mm.
I think a lot of people are struggling with those questions right now. But before we get too deep into the philosophical stuff, let's just lay out the basics for our listeners who might not be familiar with Trevino. So she's 36 years old, lives in Texas, and has two teenage daughters, a 16-year-old and a 13-year-old. And the source material we're working with today is a YouTube video essay from the channel Rotten Mango. It's titled, "Worst TikTok Mom Loves to Date Killers in Prison and Makes Daughters Call Them Daddy."
And that title alone gives you a pretty good idea of what we're dealing with here. But it's important to remember that this is just one perspective on a very complex situation. So as we go through this, I think it's important to be critical of the information we're presented with and to acknowledge that there might be other sides to this story.
Right, absolutely. We're not here to pass judgment or to sensationalize things. We're here to try to understand what's going on, to analyze the available evidence, and to offer some insights into the bigger picture. And one of the most shocking aspects of this case is Trevino's relationship history. She's made a habit of dating men in prison, some of whom have been convicted of very serious crimes.
Yeah, this is where things start to get really unsettling. I mean, it's one thing to have a personal preference, but to consistently seek out relationships with incarcerated individuals, especially those who have committed violent offenses, raises a lot of red flags.
It does, and one of those relationships in particular has really captured the public's attention. Trevino was involved with Isaiah Gonzalez, who was convicted of murder at 15 and is currently serving a 45-year sentence. And not only did she date him, she actually encouraged her daughters to call him daddy.
And that's not all. She even documented their wedding on Instagram where she's holding his photo like it's a real ceremony. It's
Yeah.
just so bizarre and disturbing to think about the impact this must be having on her children.
Yeah, you have to wonder what goes through someone's mind when they make those kinds of choices. Is it a misguided sense of love, a need for attention, or something else entirely? It's
Yeah.
hard to say for sure, but it definitely speaks to a certain level of dysfunction.
For sure. And this pattern of inmate hopping, as it's been called, is pretty consistent throughout Trevino's relationship history. She's also legally married to Noy Trevino, who's currently serving time for stabbing someone. And get this, they're in the middle of divorce proceedings, but she's already moved on to another inmate.
So she's basically juggling multiple relationships with men in prison
Right.
while going through a divorce. It's just mind-boggling.
It is. And then there's Francisco, who was convicted of a triple homicide. Trevino would actually feature him prominently in her live streams, allowing him to interact with viewers and even mock the families of his victims. It was so egregious that his prison video call privileges were eventually revoked. That's just horrifying to think that she would not only associate with someone like that, but also give him a platform to potentially re-traumatize the families of his victims is beyond comprehension. It's just cruel.
And that lack of empathy is something that really stands out in this case. It's like she's so caught up in her own world, her own drama, her own need for attention, that she's completely oblivious to the pain she's causing others.
Right, and that brings us to the financial aspect of this whole situation. Because while Trevino is busy dating inmates and creating this chaotic online persona, her daughters are reportedly lacking basic necessities. There's footage of her bragging about dropping thousands of dollars on designer handbags and shoes while her kids are sleeping on an air mattress.
Yeah, the disparity between her spending habits and the apparent neglect of her children's needs is really jarring. I mean, she even has this whole bean dip queen persona where she'll spend hundreds of dollars on hot Cheetos and bean dip. It's like she's prioritizing her own indulgences over the well-being of her children. It's really disturbing. And it raises questions about her motivations. Is this just a case of bad parenting, or is there something more calculated going on? Is she using her children's struggles to garner sympathy and donations from her followers?
That's a possibility. We know that the attention economy can be very lucrative, and there are definitely people out there who are willing to exploit their personal struggles for financial gain.
Mm.
Whether that's Trevino's intention or not is hard to say, but it's certainly something to consider.
It is, and I think it speaks to a larger issue within online culture. The blurring of lines between what's real and what's performative. It's hard to know what's genuine anymore and what's simply a carefully crafted persona designed to elicit a certain response from viewers.
Exactly. And that's where things get really tricky, because how do you separate the person from the persona? How do you know when someone is genuinely struggling and when they're just putting on a show for the camera? It's a tough question, and one that I don't think has an easy answer.
It doesn't. And unfortunately, I think that's a question we're going to be grappling with more and more as online culture continues to evolve and the lines between our online and offline lives become increasingly blurred. But let's get back to Trevino and her daughters for a moment. We've talked about the relationships with inmates, the financial disparity, the questionable parenting choices. But there's another layer to this story that's incredibly disturbing, and that's the exposure of her daughters to inappropriate content and conversations during her live streams.
This is where the ethical considerations really come into play. I mean, it's one thing for an adult to choose to engage in certain behaviors online, but when you involve children in those activities, it crosses a very clear line.
And she doesn't seem to have any qualms about doing that. There's the incident where she casually asks her daughter for suggestions on what to name her adult toy, which she refers to as the Rose. I mean, come on.
It's just so inappropriate and disturbing to think about a mother involving her child in something like that. And it's not an isolated incident either. You have to remember that infamous Uber ride where her then boyfriend Santos was seemingly engaging in sexual activity with another woman in the backseat while Trevino and her daughter were present.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. And the way she just laughed it off like it was no big deal. It's just unbelievable. It's like she's completely desensitized to what's appropriate and what's not, especially when it comes to her children.
Right, and that raises concerns about her ability to provide a safe and stable environment for her daughters. I mean, if she's comfortable exposing them to that kind of behavior online, what's going on behind closed doors, it's a scary thought.
It is. And I think it's important to remember that what we see online is just a glimpse into these people's lives. We don't know the full story. But based on the available evidence, it's clear that Trevino's behavior is raising a lot of red flags. And one of those red flags is her relationship with 19-year-old Santos, who was allegedly her daughter's crush before Trevino entered the picture. She made numerous sexually suggestive comments about him during live streams, even claiming that they've seen each other's private parts, all while her daughter was reportedly in the house.
Yeah, the age difference alone is concerning enough. But to then make those kinds of comments publicly, knowing that your daughter is likely watching, is just predatory and exploitative.
And let's not forget the Nunu song. I mean, what mother sings a song about their private parts and then asks their intoxicated auntie on a live stream if the bathroom smells after vaping. It's just beyond the pale.
It really is. And it all points to this incredibly unsettling pattern of normalizing inappropriate behavior and blurring the lines between what's acceptable and what's clearly harmful, especially for her young daughters who are exposed to it all.
It's like she's created this alternate reality where anything goes. And the consequences of that could be devastating for her children.
Exactly. This isn't just about bad taste. It's about potential long-term emotional and psychological damage. And it forces us to ask, where do we draw the line between freedom of expression and protecting children from exploitation in the digital age? It's a tough question, and one that I don't think has an easy answer.
It doesn't. And I think it's a question that's going to become even more pressing as technology continues to advance and our lives become increasingly intertwined with the online world. But before we get too ahead of ourselves, let's circle back to Trevino's behavior towards her daughter's father, both during their marriage and after his passing, because that's another piece of this puzzle that just doesn't seem to add up.
Yeah, there are definitely some inconsistencies there, and I think it's important to examine those inconsistencies in order to get a more complete picture of what's going on. So let's start with the abuse allegations. Trevino has admitted to physically abusing her daughter out of jealousy over the girl's close bond with her father. And that's a pretty damning admission.
It is, and it raises all sorts of questions about her mental and emotional stability. I mean, to be so consumed by jealousy that you would lash out physically at your own child is just incomprehensible to most people.
Right. And then after her ex-husband's death, Trevino posted a really insensitive message on Instagram with the hashtag #HeDoneMovedOn. It just seems so callous and disrespectful, especially considering that her children were grieving the loss of their father.
Yeah, the timing is just awful.
Yeah.
And it really speaks to her lack of empathy and self-awareness. It's like she's so focused on her own narrative that she doesn't even consider how her actions might affect others.
And that was further emphasized by her behavior at her ex-husband's funeral. While her children were attending the service, Trevino was live streaming herself, dancing and singing about her baby daddy.
Hmm.
It was just so inappropriate and insensitive.
Yeah, the level of detachment from reality is truly baffling. It's as if the online persona has completely eclipsed the real-life responsibilities and basic human decency. And this all came to a head during that explosive podcast interview with Camille from the Bop House. That was a major turning point in this whole saga.
That interview was definitely a game changer. It really forced people to confront the reality of Trevino's situation and its impact on her daughters. But I think it's important for us to dig deeper into the why here. What could be driving her to engage in these behaviors, knowing the potential harm it could be inflicting on her children?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Is it all about the attention, the money, or is there something more complex at play?
Well, I think it's safe to say that it's a combination of factors, but let's start with the attention economy because that definitely plays a significant role. You have to remember that social media platforms are designed to keep users engaged, and controversy is a surefire way to generate that engagement. The more outrageous the content, the more clicks, shares, and ultimately the more revenue for the creator Trevino seems to have figured out how to game this system, consciously or not, by creating this persona that thrives on drama and shock value.
So it's like she's found a way to profit from her own dysfunction.
In a way, yes, but it's not just about the money. I think there are deeper psychological factors at play here, particularly when you consider her consistent pattern of seeking out relationships with incarcerated men. This points to a potential fascination with power dynamics and control. These men are, in a sense, a captive audience relying on her for communication support and even financial assistance.
It's almost as if she derives a sense of power and control from these relationships that might be lacking in other areas of her life.
Exactly. And that need for control could stem from her own childhood experiences, which she's alluded to in some of her live streams. She's talked about being physically disciplined as a child, which could have a profound impact on her views on relationships, parenting, and even self-worth.
That makes sense. It's like she's recreating these power dynamics, seeking validation and control in a way that's ultimately harmful to herself and her children.
Right, and this is all amplified by the online environment. The anonymity of the internet can embolden people to engage in behaviors they might not otherwise consider. It creates this sense of detachment from real-world consequences, allowing these harmful behaviors to escalate unchecked.
It's like a perfect storm individual psychology, the allure of online fame and fortune and a lack of accountability that allows these behaviors to spiral out of control.
It really is, and it brings us back to the bigger picture. How do we protect children like Trevino's daughters who are caught in this web of online exploitation and neglect? What role should social media platforms play in regulating this type of content? And how can we as a society become more aware of the potential harms and advocate for better protections?
Those are some big questions and ones that I don't think have easy answers. It's clear that the internet has created a whole new set of challenges when it comes to child protection. What we used to consider private family matters are now playing out on a public stage, and it's not always clear where to draw the line between freedom of expression and safeguarding the well-being of children.
You're right. It's a complex issue with no easy solutions. But I think the first step is recognizing the problem and starting a dialogue. We need to educate ourselves about the potential harms of the attention economy, the signs of exploitation, and the resources available to help families in need.
And it's not just about being aware. It's about taking action, reporting harmful content, supporting organizations that work to protect children online, and holding social media platforms accountable for creating safer online environments.
Exactly. This isn't something that law enforcement or child protective services can solve alone. It requires a collective effort from all of us, parents, educators, policymakers, and even everyday users of social media. We need to be more mindful of the content we consume, the accounts we follow, and the messages we're sending to young people about what's acceptable behavior online.
We've talked a lot about the negative aspects of Trevino's online persona and the potential harm to her daughters. But I'm curious, is there anything positive that can come from this situation? Can we learn from her mistakes and use this as an opportunity to create a safer and more responsible online environment for everyone?
Absolutely. Every crisis presents an opportunity for growth and change. I think the Trevino case has served as a wake-up call for many people, highlighting the dangers of the attention economy and the need for greater awareness and accountability online. It has sparked important conversations about responsible content creation, the ethical considerations of profiting from personal struggles, and the long-term impact of exposing children to potentially harmful online content.
It seems like there's a growing movement towards holding influencers accountable for their actions, both online and offline. Do you think this could lead to real change within the influencer culture and the social media landscape as a whole?
I think it's certainly a step in the right direction. We're seeing more and more instances of online communities calling out problematic behavior, demanding transparency, and holding influencers to a higher standard. And this pressure is starting to have an impact. Platforms are becoming more responsive to user concerns, and brands are being more selective about the influencers they partner with.
So it's not just about canceling people or calling that on social media. It's about creating a culture of accountability and responsibility where influencers understand the impact they have and use their platforms for good.
Precisely. And that responsibility extends beyond the influencers themselves to the platforms that host their content and the brands that sponsor them. We need to see a shift in the way these entities prioritize ethical considerations and take proactive steps to protect vulnerable users, particularly children.
And what about the viewers? What role do we play in all of this?
You, as viewers, have an incredibly important role to play. You have the power to choose what content you consume, what accounts you follow, and what messages you amplify by being more discerning consumers of online content. You can help to shift the focus away from drama and exploitation towards content that is positive, informative, and ultimately beneficial to society.
So it's about being mindful of our choices and understanding that we have a collective responsibility to shape the online landscape.
Exactly. And that responsibility includes being aware of the potential red flags of exploitation, reporting harmful content, and supporting organizations that work to protect children online.
This deep dive has really opened my eyes to the complexities of online culture and the challenges we face in navigating this new digital landscape. But it's also given me hope that by working together, we can create a safer and more responsible online world for everyone.
I agree. I think the key takeaway here is that awareness is the first step towards change. By understanding the dynamics at play, the potential harms, and the ways we can all contribute to a solution, we can empower ourselves to make a positive impact.
Okay, so we've spent a good amount of time kind of dissecting the darker side of all the, the impact on Trevino's daughters and the bigger questions about responsibility online. But now I'm curious, what can actually be done? Like, what are the solutions here? Is it just hoping Child Protective Services steps in, or is there more that we can do as a community?
It's definitely not a simple answer, and to be honest, it's going to take a lot more than just waiting for CPS to show up. We need to think about preventing these situations in the first place, and that's where the online community can step up.
So you're saying we're not just helpless bystanders, we can actually make a difference.
Absolutely. Look, Trevino's case blew up because of people online. It was folks like us who noticed the red flags, compiled the evidence, put pressure on the authorities. That collective voice, even when it's messy, it can hold people accountable.
I get that. But how do we make sure that outrage doesn't turn into something harmful? Like we've seen online harassment, doxing, all that stuff. There's got to be a line between calling someone out and straight up vigilante justice. Right?
Oh, for sure. That's a huge concern. We've seen how fast things can spiral. The goal here is to protect kids, not to cause more harm or turn it into a witch hunt.
So what's the right way to do it then? How do we use our voices online to help kids who might be in danger but do it ethically?
Facts are key. Instead of just getting angry, document everything. Screenshots, links to the live stream, specific examples. That's what you need when you report this stuff to the platforms or even to CPS.
So basically, be organized and clear. Give them proof, not just our feelings. And what about the big social media companies? What's their responsibility in all this?
They've got a huge role to play, honestly. They need to actually enforce their own rules, those community guidelines. They got to respond faster when someone reports child exploitation, and they need to get better at finding and deleting the stuff before it even goes viral.
I feel like we are seeing more people call them out on that, which is good. But even if, say, Trevino's content gets taken down or her daughters are removed, is that enough? I mean, they've already been through so much publicly. Is there any coming back from that?
It's tough to say what the long-term effects will be, but kids are surprisingly resilient. If they get the right support therapy, counseling, a stable home, they absolutely can heal and have good lives.
That's good to hear, at least. It's easy to get lost in all the bad stuff and forget that people can recover and that these girls have a chance at a future.
And that's what we got to remember, that potential for healing and growth. The story doesn't have to end with just sadness and damage. Even after bad things, there's always a chance for things to get better.
This deep dive has been a lot, honestly. We went from, the depths of internet weirdness to talk about
Mm.
psychology and then the ethics of like being online in general. It's heavy stuff.
No doubt. The Trevino case is a wake-up call for sure. It reminds us there are real people behind all the viral videos and clicks. What we do online has real effects.
So true. And on that note, we got to wrap up. Huge thanks to you for helping us break down this complicated case. To everyone listening, we hope this has made you think and maybe even inspired you to be a little more mindful online. Until next time, stay curious and remember your choices matter.